Eastern Development Finance Corporation Limited, Mr. Edwin Sharuzad, Director of Financing and Investment, PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure. May I invite, last but not least, Mr. Badbayar Belgan, Chief Executive Officer from the Development Bank of Mongolia. A very warm welcome to our panel here. And with these words, I would like to now request our session chair, Mr. Yadvadkar, to kindly make his opening remarks and moderate the session.
Very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I know this is a difficult task for me, particularly post-lunch, to keep this panel discussion quite lively and to keep you awake. But I have a couple of clues to take from the moderator of the first session, who had said that any sermon is effective if it is not more than 10 minutes. So if that is in the morning session, I think the post-lunch session, any opening remark should not be more than 6-7 minutes. So I will follow that. Friends, today we are going to have discussion on this infrastructure financing and infrastructure development. We as an individual citizen of the country do come across infrastructure in every walk of our life. Suppose you are coming to this venue from your respective countries. Right from the time your flight lands at the airport, we are facing infrastructure in our wake of life. At times the pilot announces that, sorry gentlemen, we are delayed because of the air traffic congestion. So that itself shows probably the airport capacity is not adequate to handle the traffic. You land at the airport, you come out of the airport, and you want to tell to your family that I have landed safely. At times you find that the telephone lines are jammed. So the mobile network is not working. So again you come across telecom, which is one of the infrastructure space. You want to drive down to the location where the venue is, and you find there is a lot of traffic congestion, and you have the fear of missing your meeting. Again, that means the road, the transportation network is not adequate to take care of the increasing traffic. So as you see that infrastructure is there in every second of our life, but as individuals, we have not really given adequate attention as to how we can improve the infrastructure of particular country or the particular location to meet the growing demands. So in today's panel discussion, we are going to discuss what is the importance of infrastructure and how or who are the agencies who have to basically take the ownership of taking forward this infrastructure development, which is very much required for each of our countries. You know that infrastructure development is basically the main pilot of any economic growth and the development of a particular economy. Be it economic infrastructure, which I just now mentioned, whether it is airports, roads, ports, telecommunication, or be it the social infrastructure in the form of maybe the hospitals, the schools, the drinking water, the sanitation facilities. So social infrastructure as also economic infrastructure, both are equally important for the well-being of the people, for improving the quality of life of the people, and for the general well-being of the human beings. Given this context, and also it is important because the lack of infrastructure or the inadequate infrastructure basically acts as a dampener for making any further investment in that particular economy. The country basically loses its attractiveness in case the adequate infrastructure is not there in that particular economy. And it is basically a cyclical effect, because if further investment does not come, maybe in the core sector industries, or as we saw that for upliftment of the small and medium scale industries, or even in the social infrastructure, then obviously the country cannot expect to become a developed economy or even a developing economy. To remove this unattractiveness, as also to encourage more public as also private investment, it is imperative that the country as a whole takes conscious steps for promoting infrastructure growth and also thinks of what are the impediments in promoting this infrastructure growth and how to overcome those impediments. I was just going through some report which is compiled by one global consultancy firm, and they had said that the world as a whole will have to invest about 3.5% of the GDP up to 2030, and in dollar terms actually it works out to whopping amount of $50 trillion. That is at the rate of about $3.8 trillion per year on promoting the infrastructure if we have to maintain the existing status of livelihood or the status of the people who are enjoying this infrastructure. Coming to the Asia and the Pacific region, the report also said that roughly out of this $50 trillion, $26 trillion will have to be spent by the countries in the Asia and the Pacific. Now, this is a significant amount. And if these Asia Pacific countries are to invest so huge amount in maintaining the infrastructure, then there is certainly a role to be played by the development financial institutions. So these national development banks, in fact, here we are represented by all the 4 national development banks of different countries. So these will have a crucial role to play in case this type of investment is to be pumped in for maintaining the infrastructure. Yes, different models have been developed so far to attract private investment also for promoting infrastructure, and those are being worked out or those are being tried in different countries in a different manner. But before we actually come to the role of these DFIs, it is very important for all of us to understand what are the problems associated with these infrastructure projects. As most of you know, these generally projects are very long gestation projects. So being typically long gestation project, during the implementation of the project itself, there could be certain policy changes, there could be some socio-economic changes, which in turn can affect the viability, very much viability of all these projects. Invariably, in all these projects, a lot of government approvals are required. A lot of approvals from other agencies involved are required. These typically in some of the developing countries take long time. Maybe because there is lack of coordination between the different government departments, or the different agencies are not coming on board, and as a result these approvals are delayed. An important aspect of all these infra projects is that how do you balance the risk among all the stakeholders, whether it is the government, whether it is a developer, whether it is the end user, or whether it is a contractor who is going to undertake that project. So balancing of this risk as also the return for each of these stakeholders is very crucial. And in case we are not in a position to adequately balance it, then we have problems in implementation and the consequential impact. Another crucial, you can say, aspect of most of these infra projects is the back-ended cash flows. Because the project implementation is long, the cash flow generation happens slowly over a period of time as the utilization of these facilities improves, and this creates a problem for all the financiers of these infra projects because they have an asset liability mismatch. I don't know in how many countries the commercial banks are actually going to fund these infrastructure projects because they typically face this asset liability mismatch. They typically have very short to medium term sources, but whereas this end use for infra project is a long and very long term. So this asset liability mismatch is another issue which the financing of all these infrastructure projects faces. In this context, again, these development financial institutions or the national development banks have a crucial role to play because they consciously take that long-term asset liability mismatch on their books, and in the interest of the nation, actually they fund all these projects. So I think without much ado, I would like to request each one of these panel members to have their presentation done, and before that I would briefly introduce each one of them. To my left is Mr. Sergey Vasiliev. Pardon me if I have not pronounced it correctly. Vasiliev. He is deputy chairman of VEB, which is the Russian Federation. He has been a doctor in economics and he has held quite a few coveted positions in the government. And from June 2007, he has been a management board member of VEB and deputy chairman. VEB is basically a 100% government-owned bank, which is primarily funding the infrastructure projects, but it does not compete with the other commercial banks, and it participates in those projects, those who do not receive funding from the private investors. They provide different type of credit facilities, guarantees and sureties for all these projects, which have a payback period of minimum 5 years, and the total value is minimum 2 billion rubles. Next to him is Mr. Bulupal Muttaya. He is the chairman and managing director of NEDFI, which is the Northeastern Development Finance Corporation of India, primarily taking care of the financing requirement of the northeast part of the country. He had been, in fact, my ex-colleague. He had been with ADFIAP Bank for quite a few years, and total experience of about 28 years. And for the last 8 years, he has been with NEDFI. NEDFI has been it's registered as an NBFC with Reserve Bank of India, but it provides financial assistance to small, micro, and medium-scale enterprises. Besides this, it also provides financial assistance to MFIs and also undertakes various consultancy and advisory services for promoting development of industry in the northeastern part of the country. It is one of the designated nodal agency for disbursement of Government of India incentives for all the industries located in Northeast India. To his left is Mr. Edwin Saharuzad. He is the director of PTSMI. It is PT Sarana Multi Infrastructure Indonesia. He has been the director of the company since August 2014. He is a master in economics from University of Indonesia. PTSMI is also a 100% owned, Government of Indonesia owned company, which is engaged in infrastructure financing in Indonesia. It facilitates infrastructure financing and also gives advisory services for different infra projects. PTSMI has also been pioneer in developing the PPP model, basically public-private partnership for promoting the development of infrastructure projects in Indonesia. Next to him is Mr. Batbayar Balgan. He is the CEO of Development Bank of Mongolia. He has also held quite a few coveted positions in the organization and is presently the CEO of Development Bank of Mongolia. It is providing financial assistance to large-scale projects and programs for Mongolia's development. This organization has been in operation from 2012, and since then he has been associated with this organization. This Development Bank of Mongolia has been raising international funds by way of medium-term Euro bonds, etc., and has really been a pioneer in ensuring that the economy of Mongolia is taken forward so far as the infrastructure development is concerned. So I think without wasting any further time, I will request Mr. Sergey to give his presentation about whatever the activities his VEB has done in the field of infrastructure development.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I do represent National Bank, and now here are the few facts about National Bank. It was constituted as a development bank in the year 2007. Previously, it was a bank for foreign trade of Soviet Union. soon we will have our 100th anniversary in 2024. Here's a major fact about the bank: $10 billion capital, $60 billion total assets, and loan portfolio of $45 billion. That's quite modest in comparison with Brazilian Development Bank or German Development Bank. I would like to tell a story about our involvement into several huge investment infrastructure projects in St. Petersburg region. St. Petersburg is the second largest city of Russia, a rapidly growing transportation hub, a center of high-tech industry and world tourist attraction. It was developing very rapidly during the last 10 years, with some indicators of development in two-digit figures. We found out rather early that infrastructure is lagging and underinvested. Biggest part of city infrastructure was inherited from Soviet times, and in 20 years after 1990 was not really improved. And it was in sharp contrast with rapid development of other sectors. Thus, the government had taken decision to make concerted effort and to attract foreign and domestic private investors to modernize city infrastructure. The only way to do it was to create PPP, public-private partnership arrangements, thus we have three large investment infrastructure projects in this region. The first project is a new international terminal of Pulkovo Airport, which was launched in December 2013, built in a very short time of 40 months. It really improved accessibility to St. Petersburg for air passengers. The total costs were more than 1 billion euros, and the share of WEB was 144 million euros. And in other projects, the WEB was a minority investor. In this project, for example, also participate European Bank for Reconstruction Development and two other big Russian banks. The second project is the Western High-Speed Diameter, which is intra-city toll motorway. You see the cost is rather high, $2 billion, and it is mostly due to the fact that we have very many rivers, and the biggest part of this highway is on the bridges. It's much longer, we required much longer period, more than 10 years for construction, but finally it was opened in 2016. Those projects are projects which are already finished. And the third project is Federal High-Speed Highway Moscow-St. Petersburg, which will be built until 2020, when all the sections of the highway will be opened, which will provide better communication for the ground transport between St. Petersburg port and inner Russia. The fourth project is a rail link to airport, which is now under discussion. The biggest issue is whether this link will be underground or overground. Seemingly, the underground link will be more expensive, but there are big problems with overground link, because you need to remove many industrial enterprises, objects of infrastructure to build a rail link overground. We have learned rather interesting lessons from this experience, because those projects are really, they do represent, I would say, 70% of all public-private partnership projects in Russia. And I would say that they are quite successful. They really improved economic situation in St. Petersburg and gave new impetus to its development. What are the major lessons? First, that you have to start to solve the problem before it arises. because of the long gestation periods in such projects. And thus, you need very high-quality forecasts. You need to start projects only based on forecast of future situation. Thus, long-term planning is crucial in this project. The second lesson is that well-conceived infrastructure projects could never be obsolete, because such projects always create their own economic activities. They create new businesses, new opportunities, and finally they repay, maybe not in formal sense, but they repay in macroeconomic sense. And the third lesson is related to capacity building in this sphere. Crucial for success was that we had organizations which were ready to handle complicated investment projects and personnel who was able to do it. On the other hand, commitment of federal government and regional government is also very important, because government provided not only some part of budgetary financing, but also long-term guarantees. And what is also important on the regional level, that regional government would spend some resources initially, rather large resources, to promote the project. And second, that they should have a long-term view of budgetary benefits and budgetary expenses. For example, when we discuss such projects, we talk about 20-year period of guarantees, budgetary payments, and it's very difficult for regional regional assemblies to maintain such long-term view. Thank you very much.
May I request Mr. Paul to come up with his presentation?
Moderator of the session, Mr. G.M. Yadwatkar, my eminent co-panelists, Mr. Sergey, Mr. Edwin, and Mr. Badbayar, and distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen. It's my pleasure to be here. Good afternoon to you all. I represent an organization called Northeast Development Finance Corporation. It is a DFI with a mandate to work in the northeastern part of the country, which is the less developed part of India. The Northeast has 8 states with a population of 45 million. It has a literacy rate of 74%, more or less at par with the all India average. We have a land area of 2.6 lakh square kilometers, which is about 8% of India's land area. And the unique thing about this region is that it has 98% international borders, which also create a problem in terms of accessibility. It has vast natural resources, oil, coal, limestone, hydropower, and ethnic diversity is there in this region. The effort of the government of India is to ensure that there is more development in this northeastern region. And because it is less developed, there are infrastructure deficit. Northeast Development Finance Corporation was set up about 22 years ago with the mandate to accelerate the pace of industrial development in the region. At the government of India level, I think another very interesting thing which has happened is that 10% of the annual budgetary allocation of ministries and departments of the government of India, about 52 of them, have to be invested in the region. And any shortfall in investment, it goes to a central pool, which is called a non-lapsable central pool funds. And that fund is given to a ministry, which is called the Ministry of Donor. The Ministry of Donor is the only ministry which is related to a geographical area. The idea of having such a ministry is to ensure that there is convergence of the different ministries, and bring about close the gap in terms of the infrastructure deficit. As you will see from this slide, our total population is a little less than 4%. But in terms of the investments of the government of India, it's about 10% of the total budget of these departments. I would like to tell briefly about my organization. It is a public limited company. It is DFI, it's an NBFCs. We have an authorized capital of 500 crores. Our shareholders are banks and institutions. The government have no shares in our corporation. We have 22 offices which are spread over these 8 states. Total sanction so far is near about 5,000 till date. And we have assisted about 4,907. Our role is also, in terms of infrastructure, is also to be a part of this convergence in terms of accelerating development of infrastructure. One of the things which we do is that for these infrastructure which are being set up by the government of India, we finance the contractors who are there, who are building roads or hydropower. We also do the third-party monitorings of these projects for the government of India. And in social infrastructure, because of the lack of facilities there, many of the students, they go to other parts of the country for higher education. For healthcare, they also require to come to the main part of the country for their healthcare. So our effort was to bridge this gap. In this presentation, I would briefly like to talk more about how we have played a part in reducing the gap in terms of the healthcare facilities. These are the products we have. We are a financial institution, so we give loan, we give working capital term loan. We are very active in microfinance. 15% of our portfolio is in microfinance. And the services, some of the services which we provide mentoring assistance to entrepreneurs, where we help them in preparing project report. We provide advisory services. All these services are provided pro bono. We don't charge them. We have an advisory and consultancy services. One of the activities which I just mentioned is that we do third-party monitoring of central government as well as state government projects, as well as other consultancy services which they need. We also conduct many studies which include resource mapping. As a moderator mentioned, we are the nodal agency for all government subsidies and incentives. We also maintain a data bank of the northeastern region. This helps investors in understanding the region better. And of course, CSR activities is mandatory in our country, but about 5% of our profit goes to CSR activities. Techno-economic feasibility study we carry out at the request of the state government. We have a special fund for this. So far, we have already completed 70 studies, 19 ongoing studies are there. As far as the healthcare is concerned, right now we are, there's a study on regional plan and strategy for upgrading of secondary and tertiary healthcare facilities in the region. We are preparing this for our Northeastern Council, which will coordinate the growth of healthcare in the region. Another study which we are carrying out in terms of the healthcare services is also to find out what are the gaps in terms of the medical colleges, paramedical facilities in the region. Because when we look at India as a whole, we're far behind the WHO's target, which is per 1,000. In India today, we're at 0.5